overhauling hate speech legislation has provoked one of the most divisive policy debates of the current parliament. It began with a recommendation by the Royal Commission into March 15 that religious groups be covered by the law. But in July last year, the government proposed going much further than that. Justice Minister Kiri Allan joins us now. The reform around hate speech that you're announcing today, it has been significantly watered down from what was floated last July, hasn't it?
Oh, yes and no. So I think what we are doing, first we are making a simple change to the Human Rights Act, which expands the incitement provision to include religious groups. Secondly, on some of those issues that I think really spiked the ire and were complex, they're challenging, they go to the heart of one of our fundamental freedoms that we all cherish and uphold, our right to freedom of speech. And that rubs up with our obligation to protect those that are most vulnerable within the community. So what we're doing with some of those more challenging areas, we're asking the Law Commission to do a deep dive, help us strike the right balance.
But you have been working on this now for 2 years, and so why do you need the Law Commission to do a deep dive? You have been in this process already for 2 years. It looks like you're kicking it to touch.
Yeah, I'd push back against that. I think you had somebody on last week who said something pretty intelligent, I thought. He said, you've got to take New Zealanders with you. You've got to make sure that when you're making amendments in this area, that you don't cause more harm than you do good. And that's been an overarching principle, I think, that has helped us to get to this point. We're talking about some of the most vulnerable members in our community. We've got to stand here as a government and say, are these changes that we're going to introduce, will they help New Zealand and take us to a better place?
Yeah. Or
do we run the risk of really exposing, lifting off a scab, if you will, within our society that will have a counterfactual benefit for those that need our protection?
But what that tells me, Minister, is that actually you failed to do that for 2 years in this process.
Well, I'd push back strongly against that.
Why? You've gone from 6 proposals that you've floated out there, which caused that social upheaval and ripped the scab, as you say, off these issues, and now you're changing one word.
Well, we're doing exactly what the Law Commission asked of us, right?
Yes.
They said, if you make this simple change to the incitement provisions in the Human Rights Act, you extend it to include religious communities. That will have a significant impact for situations like we saw in March 15. And it's not just that community either. You know, we've grappled with anti-Semitism here in New Zealand.
Yes.
We've grappled with a whole range of religious conflicts. So we're saying, OK, what can we do now that's immediate? But also, we're cognizant. When we took those proposals out to the country, that's exactly what good lawmakers do. New Zealanders, what do we think of these provisions? You heard New Zealanders. We received 19,000-ish submissions, and there was a real strong overlay. Make provisions to make amendments to look after those that are most vulnerable, but get that balance right. Make sure you uphold that collective right that we all have, which is, of course, our right to freedom of speech.
Yeah.
If I look across at other jurisdictions that have been grappling with this, you've got New South Wales, you've got Ireland, they've been grappling with these same issues.
Yeah.
They've taken this track as well, made smaller amendments which enable those protections for those religious groups in particular.
Yeah.
But then, actually, as we evolve as a country, what the Royal Commission asked us to do, ensure that we're looking after the social cohesion aspects.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're doing.
And I want to talk to you a little bit about that as well. You're broadening protection under 61 to include religion, which is, as you say, a direct response to the Royal Commission, but not rainbow or disability communities. Why not?
This is something I think we grappled with to a great extent. I think I've personally landed, and I know my Cabinet colleagues supported this, is that we have to make sure that we do no further harm as legislators and policymakers. This is such an issue that is delicately balanced.
So what harm
and
would
I
you
need
do?
to ask for that independent law commission help us to get the balance right. And what we also need to do in the interim, we've got to take our country folk with us. We have to make sure that New Zealanders are going to support these types of reforms if we're introducing greater protections for those communities that are most vulnerable, but also limit that right to freedom of speech.
Well, this process arguably has already caused harm. It's caused polarisation, division and social upheaval, and it's probably caused harm for those groups. It's put this right into the spotlight, but there's no payoff for them, right?
Oh, I disagree with that.
Why?
I think that there's been a lot of really positive discussions that have come out. Just 2 weeks ago, I was up here in Auckland at a meeting called the Hui, which was one of the recommendations from the Royal Commission as well. You had advocates from religious communities, the rainbow community, Takatapui community, all kind of disabled communities that have been impacted significantly by the lack of social cohesion. What they've been tasked to do is help us navigate our way forward. That's where we're at as a nation. I can't hand over heart, turn to my nephews, my nieces in my Takatapui community and say, if I introduced or broadened these provisions, that I'm going to have, that these decisions will mean less harm for those that I particularly love and care about. And that's the duty of, I think, a good legislator.
So what is your message to those communities this morning who will be finding out for the first time that even though they are marginalised groups and they are harmed, in the same way as religious groups, and you've explained that, why
there are
they
differences.
won't? Yeah, but what is your message to them as they find out that those protections won't be afforded to them?
Yeah, no, there are differences, and this was particularly one of the recommendations directly from the Royal Commission, that we focus on expanding the provisions for religious belief, race and religious belief. We already have these laws in place for race. What we don't have them in is for faith-based communities. So that's a direct response. Yes, there are a broad range of other groups that we are actively working to promote and, I guess, limit the harm. But how we do that, Rachel, is going to be so critical. Sorry, Rebecca, goodness gracious me. But how we do that is going to be critical.
So why not just do it back then when the Royal Commission said, hey, listen, you need to put religious groups into that category? Why not go, OK, we're going to do that right now, and we don't have to go through this process, these proposals to get, to sort of incite all of this angst, I suppose?
Because we have to take it to New Zealanders. So the Royal Commission made broad-ranging recommendations. We as a government said we will pick up those recommendations and put them to New Zealanders.
But they didn't put those proposals out there, the ones that you put out for discussion.
What they did. So there were 6 recommendations, right, that went out to New Zealanders. They built on, they went further to test what the appetite was for New Zealanders. We heard that loud and clear. And
what did you hear loud and clear?
We heard loud and clear that people wanted to protect some of those that were most vulnerable in our communities, that religious-based communities in particular should be extended the protections that are applied to race, and it is a simple amendment to the Human Rights Act that we could make now.
But did you also hear loud and clear from New Zealanders that they did not want those protections extended to those other groups, or made into crimes, or any of the other things that were in those proposals?
Yeah, what we heard loud and clear is that if you're going to do this, then you better do it right. And look, I can't hand over heart say that if we were to introduce further laws in this area, that they would be well held by New Zealanders and not create more harm.
Do you have cross-party support for this?
We've got some support from across various parties, and I think that various parties will be grappling with them in particular. Oh, look, I'll let the other political parties speak for themselves. I'm sure my colleague Paul Goldsmith will give his views in terms of National's views on this. I will say, I've reached out across the aisle with the intent of getting support because these are small amendments that the Royal Commission have said will have a large benefit for our religious-based communities. What I've seen over the course of the last year is some pretty divisive, poor politicking that, in my mind, has created more harm than good. So why I've reached across the aisle as we bring about these small changes to the Human Rights Act is to ask political leaders to do what they can to minimise harm, make sure that we're looking after those most vulnerable within our communities, and let the debate that we have, let it be an intelligent, well-versed debate that's based on principles, not snap-grab one-liners for media soundbites.
Okay, I want to talk to you about youth crime now. It is making headlines again this week. National has said it will reboot military boot camps. I know that you are not in support of that idea, but they're for our most serious young offenders. What is Labor doing in that space?
Yeah. Look, I think that what National have identified is something that we've been talking about for months. You know, where there is a spike when it comes to some of our worst youth offenders, and we've been making several announcements, and there's programs underway right now that go to the heart of ensuring that we're making those interventions.
But what are they?
And over the last couple of months, we've seen a reduction in some of those, particularly ram raid.
But Kiri, what are they?
Yeah, exactly. So what we're doing is that we're working with police, are working with youth aid officers, are working with to provide full wraparound services to make the right interventions. You know,
but the thing is, you know, this has been spiralling out of control all year.
Got to push back against that a little bit.
But we haven't seen, you know, concrete policy. You haven't come out with the public.
No, I disagree with that. No, the grams came first, and then we had Carmel Cepoloni and Chris Hipkins make a major announcement talking about the double down of investment into these prevention and rehabilitation programs. We've also said in the House that we are looking at whether there are other tools that need to be provided to frontline officers. I'll tell you what we're not doing, though. We're not going to rehash bad policy that has been broadly condemned. Chester Burrows, Minister under John Key's government that introduced boot camps in 2008, come out resoundingly said, look at the evidence, the stuff doesn't work, is to grab media soundbites. What we've said to New Zealanders, we're not going to do that. What we are going to do is tackle the issue, but it's got to be based on evidence, and that's things that we're working through.
Minister Kiri Allan, it seems like that is a good place to leave our interview. Thank you so much for joining us here on The Nation this morning.